I've told you folks before that I torture myself by listening to Christian radio sometimes while driving around town. Well, I did it again, and this time I tuned in to a local fellow here in Denver with his own self-titled radio show on KLTT 670 AM, Bob Enyart Live. Enyart is the pastor of the Denver Bible Church, an unaffiliated evangelical crowd who meet at the Maranatha Christian Center in the northwest Denver suburb of Arvada. On his August 11th radio show, Bob decided to reach back in his archives to fill time during his program, advertising the broadcast on his website, www.kgov.com. The print read, Creation Evolution Replay. Bob plays a call from 1997 when an evolutionist, Tom Delaney, almost knocked Bob off his chair. After Bob repeatedly asked him to give one piece of evidence why he believes that evolution is true, the caller finally came up with an extraordinarily embarrassing offer. Embarrassing, that is, to our public school system. He said human embryos have gill slits. Bob almost split his seams. The show began.
Greetings to the brightest audience in the country. I am Bob Enyart, the pastor of Denver Bible Church. I want you guys to hear a phone call from years ago. My sound engineer, audio engineer, Jerry Janowski, had written a letter to the editor, the South Bend Tribune, against evolution. And so a guy who wrote somewhat regularly, he wrote a rebuttal, and then we got him on the phone. And I thought it was interesting. So let's play it. This is a flashback 15 years ago.
We have a call on the line that I'd like to go right to. But it's earlier I mentioned there was a gentleman who wrote in a response to Jerry's evolution article. And his name is Tim Delaney, and he's on the line. So, hey, Tim, Mr. Delaney, welcome to the program.
Good evening.
I'm real glad you called in.
Well, I had to tell you, I just heard from Jerry Janowski tonight.
Yeah.
So I told him I just wanted to see the program before I agreed to appear on it.
Okay. Hey, Tim, I'm really thrilled. I am. You really try to take Jerry Janowski apart in your rebuttal to his guest editorial on evolution. Jerry was putting down evolution and the religious implications of the theory, and you were defending evolution.
No, I was attacking his methods.
Well, and defending evolution.
In a previous letter I did, but not in this one.
Doesn't matter what you wrote, Tim. Creationists look at the same evidence, in your case, the letter you wrote in reply to Janowski, and come up with different conclusions. They're going to force an interpretation on that evidence that the evidence doesn't support. It's their M.O.
Hey, Tim, I'd like to give you one opportunity to give one strong evidence for evolution, because I don't think you could do one.
It's never about one piece of evidence, Bob. I'd love to see a defense lawyer try that at some complicated, intricate, detailed trial. Stand up in front of the jury and have the gall to say, hey, prosecutor, I'd like to give you one opportunity to give one strong evidence that my client committed the crime, because I don't think you could do one. Can you imagine that? Evolution is not about one piece of evidence, but a cumulative avalanche of different threads of evidence, all converging on one inescapable conclusion. But the tactic plays well with a scientifically ignorant audience.
Oh, I admitted that in the article. It's not my business to prove evolution.
No, I'd just like to know why you believe it.
Because the evidence points to it.
I'd like you to give us one bit of evidence, which I do not believe you can give one even slightly persuasive bit of evidence. I think you believe in evolution because you despise God.
Oh! Geez, Bob, did you really have to go there?
Well, let's start with, if you want,
Yeah, I do.
gill slits on the human embryo. Where do gill slits come from?
Tim, you know what you're talking about? Ontogeny recapitulates phylogeny? Tim, didn't you know that scientists utterly discredited that in the 40s? Scientists Scientists utterly discredited that in the 40s, and that's a cause for mockery and laughter among evolutionists. That how could any evolutionist ever have said that a human infant goes through the stages of a fish?
Well, Bob, regardless of Tim's intent, he was actually onto something, and not what you were thinking. You're so quick to want to score some sort of points for your side that you don't want to take the time to understand the science behind what's being said. What Tim was actually referring to was not gill slits, but gill arches, otherwise known as pharyngeal arches or pouches. And it's not about ontogeny recapitulating phylogeny. This is about how embryos, human embryos in particular, share common features with other modern creatures early in development, which point to a common ancestor. And indeed, we were once fish, Bob. All of us with a backbone were. To delve a bit deeper into the subject, let's hear from Neil Shubin, paleontologist, evolutionary biologist, and professor of organismal biology and anatomy, as well as associate dean of organismal biology and anatomy, and professor on the Committee of Evolutionary Biology at the University of Chicago, best known perhaps for his discovery of the fishapod, Tiktaalik. In his book, Your Inner Fish, he writes, fish embryos have these bulges and indentations too. In fish, the indentations ultimately open up to form the spaces between the gills where water flows. In us, the indentations normally seal over. In abnormal cases, gill slits fail to close and remain open as pouches or cysts. A bronchial cyst, for example, is often a benign fluid-filled cyst that forms in an open pouch inside the neck. The pouch is created by the failure of the third or fourth arch to close. Rarely, children are born with an actual vestige of an ancient gill arch cartilage, a little rod that represents a gill bar from the third arch. In these instances, my surgical colleagues are operating on an inner fish that unfortunately has come back to bite us. Every head on every animal, from a shark to a human, shares these four arches in development. The richness of the story lies in what happens inside each arch. Here we can make a point-by-point comparison between our heads and those of sharks. Look at the first arch in a human and a shark, and you find a very similar state of affairs, jaws. The major difference is that humans' first arch also forms some ear bones, which we do not see in sharks. Unsurprisingly, the cranial nerve that supplies the jaw of humans and sharks is the first arch nerve, the trigeminal nerve. The cells inside the second gill arch divide, change, and give rise to a bar of cartilage and muscle. In us, the bar and cartilage break up to form one of the three bones of our middle ear, the stapes, and some other small structures at the base of the head and throat. One of these bones, called the hyoid, assists us in swallowing. Take a gulp, listen to music, and thank the structures that form from your second arch. In a shark, the second arch rod breaks up to form two bones that support the jaws, a lower one that compares with our hyoid, and an upper one that supports the upper jaw. If you have ever watched a great white shark try to chomp something, a diver in a cage for example, you have probably noticed that the upper jaw can extend and retract as the shark bites. The upper bone of this second arch is part of the lower system of bones that rotate to make that possible. The upper bone is remarkable in another way too. It compares with one of the bones in our middle ear, the stapes. Bones that support the upper and lower jaws in sharks are used in us to swallow and hear. As for the third and fourth arches, we find that many of the structures we use to talk and swallow are, in sharks, part of tissues that support the gills. The muscles and cranial nerves we use to swallow and talk move the gills in sharks and fish. Our head may look incredibly complicated, but it is built from a simple and elegant blueprint. There is a pattern common to every skull on Earth, whether it belongs to a shark, a bony fish, a salamander, or a human. So, you see, Bob, those gill arches really are evidence of evolution.
That's not true. Infants don't have gill slits, Tim. This is what I pointed out. You believe in evolution, and you could not give me one good bit of evidence for it because, Tim, you haven't been convinced in your mind evolution is true. You've been convinced in your heart that you despise God. So you will take any alternative, no matter how ludicrous, even though you present yourself as an educated man.
No, Bob, you believe in creation and attack real science because you so desperately want the Bible to be true. You will take any other alternative to real science, no matter how ludicrous, even though you present yourself as an educated man.